I'm standing on this side of the screen because I'm trying a cooler format for when I do these full-length reviews, which won't be very often, but you will see the, thing, the album cover pop up over here. Hopefully it works. If it doesn't, then I'll just be standing on one side of the screen for the whole video, but hopefully not. Hey guys, it is Joe Proulx here, and today we are talking about an album I've been anticipating as one of my most anticipated albums of the year. We're going to be talking about the new We Are the City record, At Night. We Are the City is a Vancouver-based art pop, experimental pop, indie pop group comprised of 3 members: Kim McKenzie on keys and vocals, David Menzel on the guitar, and Andrew Huzelak on the drums. The group has been doing it since 2008. This is their 4th full-length album. Their debut came out back in 2009. It was a Canada-only release titled In a Quiet World. I think you can find it on Bandcamp still and on iTunes. I don't know if it's on iTunes worldwide, but it is definitely in iTunes Canada. Their 2nd full-length album, Violent, came out in 2013. It got re-released worldwide in 2015. Alongside that release, later that very year, in November of that year, they released their 3rd full-length album, globally titled Above Club. And my opinions on these albums are all positive, but definitely a different type of positivity for each one. The debut album, In a Quiet World, really seems like the group in its beginning stages. They haven't really grown as a group yet. They sound good on that record, but it's very basic instrumentation. This kind of just basic piano, guitar, and drums formula kind of continued on to the High School EP, which came out in between the 1st and 2nd full-length albums, where they were just kind of playing it overall kind of safe instrumentally. Though one thing that did change in that High School EP that came out in 2011, which was the first time I ever heard of the group, was an uptick in the instrumental ambition, with the addition of more effects, the addition of more things like string arrangements, and just generally getting more ambitious with the story behind that record, which you can look into if you would like. And it just seemed like on Violent, the group had fine-tuned a very, very, very concise yet incredibly challenging yet catchy record. It's literally all I look for in music. That's what I find in a record like Violent, and it's part of the reason that it's one of my favorite albums of all time. But Violent really, it's such a perfect marriage of catchy and experiment. And also the entire story of putting out also alongside your record a full-length feature film that was completely shot in Norway and completely written in Norwegian. It definitely has a way of kind of cementing itself in your mind if you've heard about it. And they tried to do something even more ambitious with Above Club when that came out, but it was more of a social experiment than like an artistic expression, where the group allegedly said that they were live streaming the entire making of their album that was supposedly being made in Belgrade, Serbia, which later on was revealed to be completely false. Completely not true. There's a great documentary showing how they did that and what the process was to make this so believable, and what they were thinking in terms of the concept that went into that live stream. And going into this new full-length album, it felt like, oh, what are they going to do next? How are they going to promote this one now? And it felt like this is maybe one of their more tame album cycles that they've ever had. Just kind of putting out music videos for songs, and they had a big 23-minute short film called My Dinner with We Are the City, where they kind of talked about what this record was supposed to be and how there was going to be another full-length record dedicated to a close friend of theirs who passed away, I guess, recently, and it was going to be called R.I.P., but it would be released in 2019. This record is being released sort of as a pre-album to the album, I guess, that will be released later. And while that's definitely interesting, a lot of things kind of had me a little iffy on whether this record was going to be worthy of being considered like a regular full-length record, since they kind of see it as inferior to the next album they're going to be putting out. At least that's the way they came off when they were talking about it in that short film, like saying that this record had, like, I don't know, 40 or 50 hours put into it, and the other one had hundreds of hours put into it, the one that they're going to be releasing later. And that really kind of rubbed me the wrong way at first. I kind of doubted whether this was going to be a worthwhile album at all. And then the song When I Dream of You dropped with a music video. It was the lead single to this record, and it's such a perfect first full song for this record. It really sets the tone perfectly. Basically, it is We Are the City doing what they're so good at doing. Basically writing a pop tune and then subverting it through your production choices, through your instrumental choices. Most notably, it has these drums on it that sound like they were kind of like busted in like 1,000 times, and then they played them at the end of like this really thin sewer pipe, and they recorded it from the other part of the sewer pipe, and then they compressed it to crap or something. Like I've never heard drums that sound like that, and they just kind of work. It has this really stomping momentum that feels like it's coming out of like I don't know, like a Kanye song or something like that, but like in a good way. The tune is incredibly catchy on this one. It is incredibly instantaneously easy to pick up. I just found myself loving this tune from the first or second listen I heard it. And after this, the other two singles that they dropped from this thing were really just kind of throwing me for a loop. The tracks Mid-Tempo Drama and Our Spectacular and Common Lives, especially on the first couple listens. I mean, these tracks are definitely some of the weirdest singles the group has ever put out, and in terms of experimentation and in terms of weird factor. Mid-Tempo Drama, the second single off this thing, is a really neurotic, really tension-filled pop tune that kind of seems very influenced by R&B, like modern alternative R&B, if that makes sense, with the drum sounds that are all over this thing. But it sounds very glitchy. It sounds very heavily meticulously crafted in terms of its rhythms that are popping up all over this thing. I don't know how it was like meticulously crafted to this amount. Like, it's just every couple seconds there's a new sound being thrown at you. It's a really weird and engaging song from that standpoint. Not only that, but Kane McKenzie's vocals on the track are incredibly odd. They feature this weird like pitch shifting and filtering that makes it sound like his voice is lower than it actually is, and his lyrics about this girl who died in the Mid-Tempo Drama and some of the descriptions that he uses in the verses of this track definitely give a very eerie vibe, along with the one of the refrains that is repeated in the chorus of this song, where he keeps saying, like, something is wrong with you. I genuinely believe that there is something wrong with all of you. It definitely does something in my stomach that kind of, like, makes everything kind of feel not right. At the same time, it is very pretty, but again, at the same time, it is so unsettling. However, I like it in the sense that it is so odd and so uncompromising. As is the third single off of this thing, Our Spectacular and Common Lives, which really does not work as well as a single as it does as just a track in the middle of the record, because Our Spectacular and Common Lives is like a pop song without the drop. That's how I can describe it. I mean, it has these heavy, just wearing down on you house synths that are just bright and just constant, and they're kind of being subverted as the track progresses. This constant refrain of Our Spectacular and Common Lives just constantly going on throughout the whole track, nearly, until there's a bit of a break, I think, in the second half. But it's a super duper odd 2 minutes and 45 seconds. And that's another thing about this record. For a record that was just kind of, seems like it's a bunch of bits and pieces just kind of put together to make an album, it's surprising that it only comes in at 11 songs and just under 30 minutes. It doesn't even break the half-hour mark. And the last record, Above Club, was 8 tracks in 25 minutes. I'm not sure why their records have been so short lately, but once again, like Above Club, this is another experimental record for the group. And I think it actually kind of beats out Above Club in terms of its very odd mood. It is, once again, a record for the group where they're constantly going through these extreme highs and these very, 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 very calm lows, like these extreme violent highs and these very calm lows, where you get a track like Delta Club on this thing, the third track on the record, where you just get a minute and 45 seconds of just distorted everything. The drums are like mega compressed on this thing. The keyboards and the guitar sound like they're gonna break in half while they're being played. It's just like mayhem. And at the end of the song, Andrew Huzalak, I think, at the end of the track, even goes as far as to say, just, that's a weird one. And then you get a track on the second half of this record like Peachland at Night, which is a very, very quiet piano piece with a little bit of like drum machine stuff going on at a couple points in the track, and it's very calming, it's very pretty, it's kind of dark, but it is incredibly quiet. I think it's definitely needed on this record. Don't get me wrong though, because I do think a lot of moments on here, I think the band, there's a couple moments where they just sound like they're being loud for the sake of being loud. And the songs or the musical ideas that they're using on some of these tracks are just kind of, for the lack of a better word, half-assed. Tracks like When You Dream of Waves, which tries to have a tune, but it feels like it doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't really pick up. The vocals from Kane sound very buried in the mix, like they weren't like this track wasn't mixed very well. Once again, the drums are over-compressed, and while this does kind of create a cool sound, I'm sure, it is kind of grating to hear this sound with the drums also sounding like they're kind of pitched up a little bit. It's a really odd choice of production, and it doesn't really come off as really cool or experimental, just kind of comes off as annoying. And especially on the track, Choice is unlike anything. This might be my least favorite track, probably is my least favorite track on the record, where the group doesn't even sound like they're trying to make good music. Like, are you guys trying to make something that sounds good on here? Because it just sounds like a mess of guitars and drums and keys and manipulated vocals for 2 minutes, and it's not even appealing to me in the slightest. However, despite my complaints, I do think there's a lot to love on this record. I do think that there's a lot of pretty moments. I do think that there's a lot of worthwhile moments on this record where the group is still putting out great tunes. They're still putting out good songs with experimental edges that really make the songs stand out, make them really interesting from front to back, from beginning to end. And even though at points this record is incredibly disjointed, it still comes off as a really interesting listen, a very engaging listen for the half an hour that it sticks around. I do love the opening track on here, Long Goodbye, with apparently vocals from Emily Millard. I can't tell that she's there because, again, it sounds like the vocals are pitched down on this thing. It sounds just basically like Kane or Andrew's voice pitched down singing on this track. And it sounds freaking gorgeous. Like, it sounds really, really great on here. It's incredibly atmospheric. It's a really welcoming track for the record. I love all the singles in the context of the record. I think they sound better in the context of the record. When I Dream of You, Our Spectacular and Common Lives, Mid-Tempo Drama, all great tracks in the front end of the record. And then there's some solid cuts in the back end that really kind of bring the record home, really send it off on a good note. I've already mentioned the track Peachland at Night, which is one of my favorites on the record, but right after it, the track Dark Horizon. Really one of the best tunes on the record. I mean, the melody and the chords being played on this track are beautiful. They're gorgeous. They're very haunting, but they just kind of have this beauty to them that kind of keeps my attention despite how mellow the track is overall. And it's one of the few tracks where the manipulated style of vocal, with the vocals being pitched down and kind of weirdly processed, it actually came off as very odd, but also very emotive, and it actually worked out probably the best out of any track that uses this vocal sound. Another surprising favorite for me is the track Ones You Love with Shad on the track, though if you know who Shad is, he usually is rapping. On this track, he's kind of doing a little singing interlude in the midst of the track. It actually kind of goes over pretty well considering how small his contribution is, but it just kind of slips in very seamlessly. And it's also one of the most interesting tracks instrumentally that I think pops up in the whole record. I mean, the sound of the track is just so up and down. Like it feels like it's building and then drops down, and then it keeps building. It's just a constant build and drop and build and drop until the very end of the track, which I thought was really, really interesting, especially these acoustic guitar plucks that are used throughout the track that sound like they're finger-picked, like a finger-picked acoustic guitar that sounds like it's been processed and filtered so that it's just super duper light and ethereal. It's a very, very cool sound, and I do like the very, very simple message of the track about choosing the ones that you love and the ones that love you, making sure you put your loved ones and your close friends first in your life. Make sure you care for them. And the closing track, to get it right, you have to get it wrong sometimes, is a pretty awesome little outro for the record. It has a perfect tone. I do love some of the noisy experimentation going on in this track. I wish it was a bit more climactic, especially since we've gotten closing numbers from these guys like Kiss Me Honey on the last record, as well as the closer to Violent Punch My Face, that I thought were more climactic ending numbers, but this track I think does a pretty good job of sending the record off on a pretty positive note lyrically. And I think overall I enjoy this record a ton. I think it's a very odd, experimental, and very entrancing art pop record. Not every experiment on this thing really goes over that well. A couple times on this record it definitely seems like the group really kind of phoned it in terms of like, oh, we're just gonna goof off on this track for a couple minutes and that's gonna be a track. It does feel like that happens a couple times on this thing where they really didn't try to write a good song. They really didn't try to come up with a good idea. They just kind of threw stuff at the wall and tried to see if it stuck. And I think on some tracks it still kind of works, but there's definitely moments where it doesn't. But overall, it just sounds like the group really doing some weird art pop stuff with some interesting production choices, some really odd instrumentals, some very beautiful melodies, some very beautiful chord progressions, some very anthemic choruses. It still sounds like the group is on their A game, and if this is like them kind of half-assing a record, kind of throwing it together in a short amount of time to promote their next record, I'm very excited to hear what the next record is going to be like, because if it's half as good as this, it's going to be pretty fantastic. Overall, on a scale of 1 to 10, I think I'm feeling an 8.1 out of 10 on this. I think it's a good record. It's not amazing, don't get me wrong. I enjoy it a lot, but it is not anywhere near as good as an Above Club, as a Violin for me. Is it better than their debut? I think so, yes, absolutely, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily a spectacular record for the group. I think I'm definitely hoping that this upcoming record might be a breakthrough for them in terms of a new sound, because it feels like they've kind of stuck with this for 2 records now, and I would like to see the group progress into a slightly different lane on the next record, or just try something a little bit different. But as it stands, I still think that they're doing a good job on this record, and if you're into your weird art pop groups, your experimental pop, your indie pop groups that are kind of on the weirder side of things, like an Animal Collective or something like that, then I would totally check these guys out and give them a try. Anyways, that is it. Thank you guys for watching. My name is Joe Proulx. This is Joe Proulx Music Reviews, and I'm gonna go make some supper because I am starving right now, and I just filmed this after class, and oh my goodness, I need some food.